So the chandeliers dripped with gold light, and the marble floor reflected the elegance of gowns worth more than my annual salary used to be. Before everything changed, I stood there, clutching my clutch bag with trembling fingers, my dress hugging curves I had long been taught to hate, curves my mother-in-law never failed to insult. She was the queen of the night, floating between high society guests in her diamond necklace and wine, red gown, the kind of woman who thrived on attention and cruelty disguised as humor. My husband had begged me to attend. "Just smile, don't let her get to you," he'd whispered before we stepped inside, but when the room silenced after her shrill laugh, and her words sliced through me like knives, there was no escaping the humiliation. "Doesn't she look like a fat pig stuffed into satin?" she declared, her voice ringing loud enough for the champagne glasses to quiver. Laughter rippled through the crowd, and my face burned hotter than the spotlight overhead. Every insecurity I'd buried, every tear I'd cried in silence, rose up like ghosts wrapping chains around my neck. I wanted to run, to disappear into the night, but then, something shifted. I saw her smug face, basking in her cruelty, and deep inside me, anger turned into a fire I could no longer ignore. Because what she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the very event she flaunted as hers, the empire she believed she controlled, was standing on ground that no longer belonged to her. The paperwork had been signed weeks ago, the acquisitions complete, and tonight, beneath the crystal lights and cruel laughter, the woman she mocked as a fat pig was the one who had the final say in her kingdom. Tata, long before the gala, before the glitter and champagne and humiliating laughter, there were the years of quiet cruelty that shaped me like cold steel under fire. My mother-in-law had always hated me, though she masked it under backhanded compliments and sly remarks that cut deeper than any open insult. To her, I was never enough, never pretty enough, never thin enough, never worthy enough of the man she called her perfect son. Every family dinner became a stage for her to chip away at me. She would glance at my plate with a smirk and whisper, "Careful, darling, you don't want to break the chair." When I wore red, she'd sneer that it made me look like a tomato at a farmer's market. And when I spoke about my dreams, she laughed as if ambition were a disease only I carried. My husband defended me sometimes, but he was her son first and my ally second. I learned to swallow the pain, to nod and smile while bleeding inside. I built walls inside myself, and behind them, I began to dream of a life where her voice could no longer chain me. Those silent years became my training ground. While she sharpened her tongue, I sharpened my vision. While she mocked my weight, I built endurance no gym could measure. While she tried to make me small, I grew in ways she could never see. She thought she was breaking me, but what she was really doing was forging someone who would one day own the very air she breathed. Tajajakada. It began in the smallest, quietest of ways, an idea scribbled in the back of a notebook, late at night when the house was finally still and her words still echoed in my mind like cruel lullabies. I had no money, no backing, no golden connections like the people at her glittering galas. What I had was pain, and pain can be a powerful fuel if you know how to burn it. I taught myself what I didn't know, read books until my eyes blurred, and worked side jobs no one respected just to save enough for my first step. While she laughed at me for being just a housewife, I was researching markets. While she mocked my body at family dinners, I was building a business plan in secret. And while she boasted about her socialite empire, I was quietly laying the foundation for something she couldn't even imagine. At first, it was just me and a second-hand laptop at the kitchen table. But late nights turned into small wins, and small wins turned into contracts, and contracts turned into whispers in the industry that a woman with grit and vision was making moves. I wore her insults like armor. Every time she called me a fat pig, I thought of how pigs are underestimated, resilient, and stronger than most predators believe. That image burned in me. If she saw a pig, then I would become the kind that devours an empire. And so, brick by brick, with no one cheering and everyone doubting, I built something she couldn't see coming. A dream sharp enough to cut through her arrogance. Tajarjapu. The first real taste of victory came on a rainy afternoon, the kind where the city smells of wet concrete and possibility. I signed my first major contract in a cramped cafe with ink that smudged beneath my trembling fingers. It wasn't millions. Not yet. But it was proof. Proof that the world outside her sharp tongue believed in me. I remember walking back home soaked, clutching that folder like it was a golden crown, only to be greeted by her voice dripping from the living room, where she sat with her friends. "You'll never be more than a fat, desperate wife living off my son's money." She laughed, and their giggles filled the air like poison. I wanted to scream, to slam the contract on the table and show her what I was building, but I didn't. No, I swallowed it like fire, because revenge tastes sweeter when it simmers. So I smiled, nodded, and went upstairs to my room, where the walls heard the truth. She couldn't see her words no longer broke me, they built me. Over the next year, my business grew faster than anyone predicted. Investors who once brushed me off came knocking at my door. Late nights became early mornings, and sleepless hours became milestones. And still, she mocked me. Still, she told her friends I was wasting my husband's money, that I was a joke in heels. But what she didn't realize was that the joke was on her. For every cruel word she spoke, I grew stronger, sharper, more determined. And with each passing day, I was climbing a ladder she didn't even know existed. A ladder that would one day place me far above her jeweled crown. Tajanjata. It was subtle at first, almost invisible to anyone not paying attention. A whispered rumor in her social circle that one of her favorite venues was under new management. A charity sponsor pulling out of her event at the last minute, forcing her to scramble. A supplier she'd depended on for years, suddenly redirecting their loyalty elsewhere. She blamed everyone but herself: lazy assistants, incompetent vendors, fickle donors. She never once imagined that the unseen hands shifting her world belonged to the woman she called a fat pig. I remember watching her at dinner one evening, her diamond bracelet clinking against her wine glass as she complained loudly to my husband about her bad luck. She looked smaller somehow, not physically, but in presence. The woman who once towered over every room was suddenly scrambling to maintain her throne. And all the while, I stayed silent, cutting my steak, nodding politely, while inside me bloomed a secret smile. Because behind the scenes, my company wasn't just growing, it was quietly acquiring. I had investors now, allies who believed in my vision. And together we were targeting industries she thought she controlled. Step by step, her empire was being eaten away, and she didn't even know whose hand held the knife. Her insults grew sharper as her grip grew weaker. Maybe she sensed it. Maybe deep down, she felt the shift in the air. But still, she clung to her arrogance, certain that I was nothing more than a nuisance in her gilded life. She had no idea that the very ground beneath her jeweled heels had already begun to crack, and one day soon, she would fall right through it, into my hands. Tejajatu, to the day the final documents were signed, I felt the kind of stillness that comes before a storm. My company, once a dream scribbled in secret, had grown into a force powerful enough to swallow smaller empires whole. And her empire, her beloved events company, the one she flaunted at every gala, the jewel of her reputation, had been bleeding money for months without her even noticing. She thought she was untouchable, wrapped in champagne bubbles and applause. But her partners had grown tired of her arrogance. All it took was a quiet conversation here, a whispered proposal there, and soon the pieces began falling into place. Investors who once wrote her checks now signed mine. Vendors who once praised her now came to me. She thought she was hosting her grandest gala yet, her name stamped in gold across the invitations, her face smiling from the society pages. But what she didn't know, what made my pulse thunder with a mixture of rage and triumph, was that the ownership of that gala, the contracts, the staff, the very building it was held in, no longer belonged to her. It belonged to me. I watched her that night, standing under the chandeliers like a queen on her throne, laughing too loudly, sipping champagne as though it were victory in a glass. And I thought about how sweet the reveal would be, how poetic that the woman who spent years calling me a fat pig would soon find out that every paycheck, every bill, every brick of her kingdom now had my signature on it. She believed she was untouchable. She had no idea she was already mine. The night of the gala felt like stepping into a movie I had written myself. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen fireworks, violins wept from the corner stage, and the air smelled of perfume, power, and false smiles. I had dressed deliberately, a sleek black gown that hugged every curve she'd mocked. Diamonds on my ears that glittered not from my husband's wallet, but from my own success. The staff, my staff, moved with quiet precision. Each one a silent soldier in the empire she still believed she ruled. Guests murmured my name now, though she didn't hear it, too busy basking in the spotlight. She floated across the room in her crimson gown, greeting dignitaries, CEOs and celebrities like a queen, completely unaware that she was hosting an event funded, staffed, and owned by me. Then it happened, like she couldn't help herself. She caught sight of me across the room, raised her champagne glass, and with a voice dripping with venom disguised as humor, she laughed. "Oh, look who's here. The fat pig dressed like a chandelier." The crowd chuckled nervously, unsure if they were supposed to laugh or pity me. My cheeks flushed, but my smile didn't falter. Because unlike every other time, I wasn't the powerless woman swallowing her shame. Tonight the walls, the lights, the contracts, the checks, they were all mine. I let her enjoy her moment. Let her think she'd won yet again. Because in a few minutes, in front of every glittering guest she'd invited, her entire world was about to flip upside down. The microphone's soft feedback silenced the chatter, and every head in the ballroom turned toward the stage. My heart pounded. But my smile was steady as I stepped into the golden spotlight. She was still laughing at her own cruel joke when I spoke into the mic, my voice calm but sharp enough to cut glass. "Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight for this incredible celebration, not just of art, or business, or society, but of resilience." I paused, letting my eyes sweep over the crowd, letting them lean closer. I stand here, not as a guest, but as the host. Because as of last month, every single asset, every contract, and every brick of this empire has come under new ownership. Mine. A hush fell like a wave crashing to shore. Gasps, whispers, heads whipping toward me and then toward her. She blinked, confused, frozen in place. "That's right," I continued, my voice steady, amplified. "The woman you mocked, ridiculed, humiliated, is now the one signing your paychecks. And yes," I locked eyes with her across the glittering ballroom, "that includes yours." The silence was deafening, broken only by the sound of her champagne glass shattering against the marble floor. Guests shifted uncomfortably, some suppressing smirks, others wide-eyed at the drama unfolding in real time. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. For the first time in her life, she was speechless. And in that silence, the very silence she had stolen from me for years, I felt the most exquisite justice. The kind of revenge that doesn't need cruelty, because truth itself is the weapon. Da-da-da-da-da. For a long, stretching heartbeat, the ballroom stayed frozen, the violin silent, the crystal glasses trembling in guests' hands. Then, like a dam breaking, the murmurs began, first whispers, then shocked gasps. Then the low ripple of scandal moving through the crowd like fire through dry grass. People were looking at me differently now. No longer the quiet, overweight wife to be pitied, but the powerful woman who had turned humiliation into an empire. I caught glimpses of admiration, even envy, on faces that had once smirked at my discomfort. But my mother-in-law, she was unraveling. Her crimson gown seemed suddenly too bright, her lipstick too harsh against a face drained of color. "This is ridiculous," she barked, her voice cracking under its own weight. "She's lying." But when she demanded that her finance manager confirm ownership, he looked down, his silence louder than any confession. One of her oldest allies, a silver-haired donor who had always stood at her side, quietly crossed the room to shake my hand. The crowd began to shift, literally, forming a subtle but unmistakable circle around me, while she stood isolated in the center like a dethroned queen. She tried to laugh it off. Some silly misunderstanding. Of course. But no one laughed with her. The staff she thought loyal now stood at attention by my side, waiting for my nod. It was as though the entire room had flipped its axis in an instant. And she was the only one who didn't understand gravity had changed. For the first time, she wasn't the predator circling me. She was the animal backed into a corner, blinking in the light of her own downfall. And I, the woman she had called a fat pig, had become something far larger than the insult could contain, the architect of her collapse. The room waited, hanging on the silence like it was oxygen, every eye flicking between me and the woman who had once made me shrink into shadows. She tried one last time, her voice trembling. "You'll regret this. You don't belong in my world." I stepped closer, heels clicking against the marble. My voice low but carrying through every corner of the glittering hall. "Your world," I said, pausing to let the words pierce the air. "This world was never yours. It belonged to the people you used, the people you mocked, the people you crushed beneath your heels. And tonight, it belongs to me." Gasps swept through the crowd, but I didn't stop. "You called me a fat pig," I said, my voice steady as steel. "And maybe I am, because pigs don't starve. Pigs survive. Pigs eat what others throw away, and still grow strong enough to run the farm." A murmur of approval rolled through the guests, some even clapping softly. The tide fully shifted now. Her mouth opened, closed, her jeweled hands shaking as if she might faint under the weight of her own downfall. I leaned in just enough so only she could hear the final blow. "And from now on, every time you cash a check, it'll have my name on it." Then I stepped back, raised my glass to the stunned crowd, and said clearly, "To survival, to success, to justice." The ballroom erupted, applause crashing like thunder, glasses raised high, and her empire burning quietly to ashes around her. In that moment, I didn't just win. I reclaimed every piece of myself she had tried to steal. Revenge had never tasted so sweet, because it wasn't just revenge. It was justice, wrapped in power, signed in ink, and sealed with her silence.